Good morning. The webinar will start in 3 minutes. The webinar will start in 2 minutes. The webinar will start in 1 minute. Good morning and welcome to TFEA's COVID-19 Task Force webinar series. Today's webinar is the ABCs of coping with COVID-19. Our speaker today is Joseph LaBeau, who is a licensed professional counselor in independent practice since 2005. He has been in this business since after clinical training, including training at 2 different medical schools, or schools of medicine, I guess I should say. Mr. LaBeau is a U.S. Air Force veteran and a retired city manager. In addition to running a successful counseling practice, Mr. LaBeau consults with public organizations in the area of mental health. His service focus is on the development of a mentally healthy, organized climate, culture, and service ethic. His services include executive professional assistant, plan, mind medicine workshops, healthy mind achievement workshops, case consultation, and policy development. Welcome, Joseph. We're glad to have you here today, and we're all looking forward to listening to what you have to say. It's all yours.
Joseph, if you're able to hear us, it looks like your microphone is muted. There you go.
Hi there, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, great. Thanks for that introduction. You know, one of the things I really like to do is take some time here with you, helping you, hopefully through this time. Now, I'm not going to be talking about although I have been trained at a couple of medical schools, I'm not going to be talking about medical interventions like washing your hands or masks, using masks or distancing. What I really want to talk to you about is my area of expertise is in mental health adjustment and adjusting to this challenge that we're all facing. And with that, may I ask you if you would please go to the next slide. Hello, Jessica, can you hear me?
I sure can. It's on the next slide.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing that on mine, but I'll just kind of go ahead there.
Okay.
It should say worldwide pandemic at the top.
Yep, that's what we're seeing.
Okay, excellent. So look, you know, the question is, how do we emotionally cope to this? And we are in extraordinary times. This is going to be in the history books. Kids are going to be reading about this one day. We've got 7.9 infections confirmed by the World Health, or 7.9 million infections confirmed by the World Health Organization. Almost 500,000 deaths so far worldwide, confirmed again by the World Health Organization. This is a worldwide event. No two ways about it. What would certainly be mentally unhealthy and unresilient would be to deny that and kind of try to go about business as usual. We need to really focus on what we're thinking and how we're interpreting what's going on around us, so that we can cope effectively. Probably most close to home, of course, there are those of us that maybe have been touched by the health impact and made sick by the virus, but probably a broader impact is the economic one that we're all facing, reduction in our incomes one way or another. The entire world is in a technical recession, and we wonder what's going to happen next. I just looked at my Google News, and it said 1.5 million folks have filed for unemployment, which is a staggering number of folks. So the question is, again, how do we cope? You know, how do we get a mindset that helps us had about how COVID might be affecting you personally? We thought that'd be interesting to the group to see how your colleagues are being affected. And with that, I'll refer to Jessica, if you could begin the polling, please, and launch the polling, Jessica.
Sure thing, Joseph. Okay, and I should go ahead and mention for all of the attendees that all of these polling questions are anonymous, so no fear on having any information shared about you personally. But just to get a general sense, the first question is, have you or any of your family members lost their job or been furloughed? with the options of yes and no. And we'll give everyone about 2 more seconds to answer. Perfect. And all right, great. With that, I'm going to go ahead and close the polling, and the results are very interesting. It looks like we have a complete 50-50 split of the attendees on the call right now of yes. 50% of the folks on the call have either lost their job or been furloughed themselves, or have a family member who have lost their job or been furloughed themselves. The second question, again, this is anonymous as well. Have you or a family member tested positive for COVID-19? And we'll give folks a couple more seconds to get that one answered. Great. Ending that polling. And the results are a little bit different on that, but we have a couple of people who have experienced being actually tested positive for that. And lastly, for our third question, do you know of events that are facing closing down for good if they're not able to have their event this year? Very good. All right, I'm going to give that one a couple more seconds to get your answers in. All right, so lastly on this one, we have 67% who are not aware of any events that are facing closure, but 33% of our attendees do know of some events that are facing closure if they're not able to happen this year. All right, good information there, Joseph. Back to you.
Thank you, Jessica. So at least, we've got a half of the group today, to somewhere between a half to a third, that are facing some serious adverse consequences of this global event that we're all facing. So this really brings it home. This is affecting us. Jessica, just as a sidebar now, my slides are not advancing. So what I'm going to do is, as I go, I've got a paper copy here, and as I go ahead in the presentation, I'll read the slide to you and ask you to confirm that you're on it before I start the next piece of the presentation. Is that okay?
That sounds great. And if one of our attendees wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear if you're seeing the correct slide. Right now, Joseph, I'm on the slide that says ABC model with Albert Ellis's name. So is that the correct slide for you next?
That's perfect for me. And,
okay.
And I'm going to go ahead and lecture from that for a second here.
Sounds good. And if one of our attendees could post in either in the chat window or the questions and answers and let us know if you're seeing the correct slide, that would be great. Thanks.
Great.
Okay, it sounds like people are seeing it. Wonderful.
Okay, very good. Okay, so I'd like to begin with a model by a psychologist named Albert Ellis, who's no longer with us, but he was brilliant. He was direct, and some people thought he was rude, but boy, could he help people fast with a short conversation. And I loved his model. And it's called the ABC model. And just a little bit of short talk here before I introduce the model itself to you. Here's the idea, folks. This is an idea of trying to analyze how it is we become upset in ways that, are unhelpful, and then what we can do about it, okay? This is a simple approach. It begins with the idea that thoughts cause feelings. You can maybe draw a T and then a line to and then an arrow to an F somewhere on your notes. reminding you that the basis of this work is the idea that we're going to focus on the idea that thoughts cause feelings. You know, it's not too hard to imagine. If you figure like you're visiting somebody in the hospital and they're in a coma and they've got all those wires attached to their head and an electroencephalogram, and then on the screen, it's a flat screen, just a beep, no movement whatsoever. Well, you're not going to expect to see any smiling, you know, any groaning, any complaining. That person is going to be completely blank. No emotion, no thoughts, no emotions. Thoughts cause feelings. Let me give you an example a client of mine gave me just the other day. This client of mine came to see me for anxiety, and we were talking about this very model and applying. He said, you know what? I went out to my mailbox the other day, and I pulled out a letter. And the letter I saw immediately was from the IRS. And as soon as I saw that letter from the IRS, boy, my blood pressure went up. I groaned. I just got all taken. What do these people want with me? You know, the IRS is never sending you letters to congratulate you on your success the previous year. You know, it's usually something unpleasant, maybe like an audit or something like that. So that was his reaction. Get the letter out of the mailbox. Boom. He's upset, disturbed, mad. And then, of course, as he opens the letter and reads it, turns out the letter's talking about the government payment for COVID and how, you know, he may be eligible, et cetera, et cetera. Immediately, as soon as he realizes that the letter's about that, he feels better. He feels fine. So he goes from being outraged, upset, disturbed, to feeling just fine. I mean, faster than any kind of drug could do it, okay? Faster than any kind of anxiolytic, no matter whether it's based on
Joseph, if you could, something has happened with your microphone. You've cut out. We're no longer able to hear you.
what caused the shift in mood was his thinking, what he believed was true about the situation. Or taking a letter out of the mailbox and looking and getting a letter from the IRS would have been the activating event, okay? Then on the bottom right of the triangle would be beliefs, the things that you believe to be true about the activating event. And then on the left would be the consequence of that belief. See, T leads to F, thought leads to feeling. And so the consequence is this guy groans, he gets angry, his heartbeat goes up. And then to test our hypothesis that this is how it works, we remove the stimulus of the belief. And all of a sudden, by him reading on and saying it's not a threat, it's just a notice about a potential benefit, now instantly he feels better. So this is the ABC model, and we're going to apply it, even though in this is a rather trivial matter, we're going to try it to the much more serious, much more overwhelming matter of the COVID-19 crisis. So if you'll go to the next slide, please.
Sure thing.
And just let me know when you're there. It should say activating events.
I am there. And Joseph, I'll say there's something happening with your microphone. It's cutting out every now and then, so I don't know if it's sensitive or not, but just know that it's,
okay. I'll try to be especially still, and I'll try not to modulate my voice very much.
Thank you.
All right, guys, so we're on the ABC model. And we're thinking now, we're focusing now on COVID, applying it to COVID, and we're thinking now of the activating event. That's the letter in the previous story. Well, what do we have with COVID that's an activating event for an emotional disturbance? Oh my gosh, just the continuous news, right? Worldwide coverage. Powerful, powerful activating events. Businesses and excuse me, businesses and events closing. You know, in your profession, folks canceling their conferences and canceling their festivals, shelter in place orders. I mean, in my lifetime.
All right, Joseph, if you're able to hear me, your microphone has, it seems like, I don't know if it's run out of battery or what's going on, but it's definitely cut out completely.
Can you hear me now?
I sure can, but what I would almost suggest, because your microphone keeps cutting out, is if you could call in to the panelist mode and be on your phone to do the talking, because I think that would actually serve the audience better to be able to actually hear the entirety of what you're telling us.
Okay, how would I go to that?
Yeah, and for our attendees, thank you so much for bearing with us. I think if we can get Joseph in on the phone call, we'll be good to go here. So just sit tight for 1 second.
You know, I'm noticing that on my screen that the mute keeps coming on by itself.
There was one moment there where you did also mute yourself, but it was not, that was not the entirety of the problem. Sometimes it was cutting out even when you were showing as not muted. So
Okay.
here is the phone number for you. All right, it's going to be 346-248-7799.
All right, just punching that in.
Great, and then once it asks for the webinar ID.
Enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
It is 821-0079-7285. And then if it is asking for our participant ID, it is 501232.
Excuse me, I guess I'll need that meeting ID again. Oh, I just got hung up on. What's that number again? I'll write these down and then do them.
Okay, perfect. So the phone number is 346-248-7799. The
Okay.
webinar ID is 821-0079-7285. And the participant ID is 501232.
All righty, be right there.
Great.
Hello, folks. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. I'm gonna try to find a way to kill the echo here. We've really entered technological heck here, haven't we? Well, all right. I just shut the lid on my computer. So there we go. So we should be on activating events, and we should be talking about the activating events in the ABC model applied to COVID-19 crisis. Is that right? Hello?
That's what I see. Jessica's still muted, but I see that. This is Kay.
Okay. As long as somebody can talk me, let me know what you're seeing, because I'm just operating from a phone and a piece of paper. Shall I continue?
Continue.
Okay, so if you recall the ABC model, the A was the letter that was so disturbing. The B was the belief that it was something bad, and then when you examine the letter, it would turn out to be good. So his feelings went from bad to good. So now we're going to apply this to COVID-19. And look, the A for COVID-19, as I was saying, are these incessant news reports of disaster, business events closing, sheltering in place, orders, which have never happened in my entire lifetime, and I'm 65. And, the only time we did things like that, we would practice. As I was a child, I remember practicing for atomic bombs, and we would go under our desks. That's what that reminds me of, the kind of catastrophe we were preparing for. Masking is another activating event. Everybody walking around with masks. How bizarre, you know, how like a sci-fi movie. Very difficult not to feel disturbed when this becomes the daily norm. Social distancing, again, we're meant to touch each other. The touch is an intimate part, an important part of relationships. We do handshaking to kind of to put each other at ease, to punctuate the beginning and ending of meetings. These are social cues that are just simply vanished. And then think about the impact of just all of this toward isolating the individual, the activating event of being isolated. You know, the worst thing they can do, I guess, in society is throw you in prison. I guess they could execute you as the worst, but the worst of the worst is a punishment, at least, aside from execution, is isolation. They put people in isolation because they know the suffering that it causes. We aren't meant to be alone. We're social animals. And so this is, these are very powerful activating events, much, much worse than a letter in the mail. What I'd like to do is switch now to the next slide, which should say consequences inappropriate. And I'll just wait until somebody tells me that that's up.
Slide is up.
Okay, great. So look, T to F, thoughts cause feelings. So if we have anxious thoughts, if we have these consequences, these activating events, the consequence of having these activating events is going to be to, what is it activating? It's activating anxious thinking. fearful ideas. Now, I want to make a distinction here between anxiety and panic, which is the top of the slide, and useful fear. Useful fear, you know, if we could take fear away from you by a pill or an operation, we would not do it. You need fear. You know, when you step out on the curb, off the curb in front of a truck, you need a jolt of fear to get you to jump back up on that sidewalk. So that's useful fear, but what is not useful is anxiety, which is a feeling of dread that doesn't have a direct object. It's just a feeling of vulnerability and that something bad is going to happen. Or panic, which is much more intense, but it's often brought on by chronic anxiety, and it's like an electric charge building in an individual, and then eventually the lightning the interior lightning kind of develops, and that's the panic attack, which is most people, when they've had their first one, think they're having a heart attack. Again, this is useless, not helpful response to these overwhelming activating events, and the belief that we're vulnerable, we're in danger. And then as well, anger. You're going to see folks, and maybe yourself, that are angry. And there's part of us, not the rational part and healthy part, but there's part of us that insists that things should be different. Very shouldy part of ourselves. Things should be different, in that this is so unfair. And that type of thinking, although it's irrational, is going to lead to anger and angry feelings. Depression. You know, things must remain a certain way. I should not experience any losses or hurts. And if I do, I'm just going to collapse. I'm going to withdraw. I'm going to, next line there would be miss despair is what it's supposed to say, despair. I have a client who is right now working in a music store in Austin. Interestingly, I'm able to see people across the state by telehealth video link. And I've got a client in Austin who's working in a music store, very low-end music store in a kind of obscure part of Austin. And he's filled with despair because he's been trained. He's a highly trained musician. He's played with orchestras, philharmonic orchestras in major cities. And he's just filled with despair because there are no orchestras, there are no big orchestra halls being filled with musicians and listeners. And then the next one, denial. You know, this is one of the worst things the consequences of an irrational response to COVID would be denial. And boy, are we seeing it, you know. The Memorial Day parties that they had, I think it was in Oklahoma, they were televised on the news. Hundreds of people all congregated elbow to elbow as if nothing's happening. And as our states move to reopen, we're seeing people flock to restaurants and really doing a lot of dangerous behavior because they're in denial that there's a threat, and it can be a very lethal mistake to make. And then there's confusion. A response of kind of a dulled confusion, not understanding totally, feeling a little disembodied, feeling a little disorganized. A friend of mine used to read or tout a book called "Who Moved My Cheese." It was kind of big in I think it was the 90s. Great little book. You can read it in about an hour. Who Moved My Cheese? But it's about how we're like mice in a maze, you know, and mice in a maze get used to finding the cheese at the end of the maze. And then at the end of the maze, they don't find that cheese where it was. they become very disturbed, confused, erratic, depressed, anxious. And we're like that. So our new circumstances have created a situation where finding our reward, our paycheck, our enjoyment at the end of the day, the things. My wife the other day was spending her like 12th hour in the yard doing gardening, and I complained a little bit, and she said, well, what else have I got? What else have I got? You know, and she's a very social person, and all that's been denied to her. So she's a little confused about how to find her cheese, you know, and we all are. And then there's acting out. These are the consequences of inappropriate, dysfunctional application of our emotional system. See, our emotional system is a guidance system. The reason we have our emotions is they're supposed to direct us, to help us survive and make appropriate adjustments to our circumstance. In every circumstance, there's an appropriate behavior that helps us to get through that circumstance and successfully. And our emotional guidance system is supposed to do that. But what happens with what we see in the ABC analysis is that when those beliefs get distorted, then we start having inappropriate, unfunctional, dysfunctional, disturbed emotions and behavior. The last one being acting out. Drinking. I'm getting a lot of clients who are doing a lot of drinking now because they're home, and I guess so is the whiskey bottle. I'm getting folks who are staying, couples, a lot of couples problems, a big rush on marital counseling because now there they are, right there next to you, 24/7. And whoa, those things that used to annoy can kind of be exaggerated, especially if we're just frankly frustrated and anxious. And then acting out in group gatherings, almost, you know, like I said before, I think that that's a bit of acting out the emotion. When we're in this big party mode, it's as if we can celebrate return to normality without having defeated our nemesis. So these are the consequences of the way we're thinking about the activating events, those stressful experiences, the news reports, shelter in place, masking, social distancing. Those activating events have activated within us some fearfulness, some bad ideas that lead us to have these kinds of emotional consequences and behavioral consequences that are very dysfunctional. So let's go to the next slide. That one should be beliefs, irrational and inappropriate. Let's look at those irrational ideas that almost all of us harbor to some degree. They're sitting there in the back of our mind, and they get activated by these extraordinary circumstances. So you let me know when you're there at beliefs.
The slide is up.
Okay, very good. Mostly the objects we have in mind are at the top when we get disturbed. We're thinking about our loved ones. We may have lost, in this case, we may have actually lost loved ones. And so we're dealing with that, the very human and very necessary experience of grief, but we're complicating that grief. We're complicating it and expanding it and multiplying it. And we're doing something called anticipatory grief. You know, in our wild, dark imaginations, maybe we're barely aware of it. Some of us are certainly anticipating the loss of loved ones who aren't even sick, you know, running the scenarios through their minds. And work. We need work to live. Freud said we need to work, live, and play to be healthy. So work is so important to us, and it's threatened for many of us, or it's disrupted or strangely distorted. I've been doing all my work online as opposed to face-to-face, and it's a huge adjustment. Just amazing how different the work is. The work at home. You're going to hear a lot of that, I think, a lot of books on how to work at home. But anyway, it's a huge, for those of us who have survived the unemployment, the work at home, and then those who remain in actual workplaces have their own survival, perhaps guilt, but also workload. Now they're doing it all, you know. So work's been profoundly affected. And then lifestyle, of course, and that's kind of what the drum I was hitting earlier with the stay at home and the distancing, you know, and my wife wanting to work in the yard for 12 hours at 90-degree heat. Lifestyle. I mean, she can't go visit her very social family, very big families that she comes from, and they meet once a week religiously for a barbecue gathering, and you don't miss that, you know. But it's gone now, and the family feels it. I mean, lifestyle change is tremendous there. So these are the areas, the object areas where a lot of our negative conjecturing comes from. And why do we do this? Well, we as human beings have a negative subjective bias. We're a subjective bias. In other words, if we let our imaginations run away, especially in times of stress, we are going to think bad things, exaggerate. We're going to have fearful ideas erupt. There's a whole area of this that we teach in therapy called automatic thoughts. Automatic thoughts are thoughts that we don't really invite, but they run around in the back of our head. They're like a dialogue. A lot of them come from parents, but they can come from other places. Some which we construct ourselves, but they're little computer programs, you might say, in the back of your mind that you're not fully aware of unless you focus on them, that drive us into thinking we're not adequate. We just can't deal with all of this. There's some themes that most people can recognize when we point them out, and those are the ideas over on the slide where it says catastrophizing and expecting the worst. You know, some people actually, my anxiety, surprise, my anxiety patients all think it's a great idea to expect the worst. That way they'll never be surprised, I guess. But they're awfully anxious. And then catastrophizing, you know, catastrophizing. My wife's not in the room, so I can get away with saying that, you know, when you say to me that what else do I have but to you know, obliterate my senses by exhausting myself out with gardening, when you say that to me, you're really catastrophizing, you're really exaggerating, because there are many other things you have. You still can do business with masks and et cetera, et cetera. But there's this part of us that doesn't want this new reality, and we want to resist it, and so we're angry with it, and so we create these resistances. It's a catastrophe. If it happens, then the world must burn. All my world must burn, you know. And there's the idea, as I mentioned before, that it's just unfair. I can't accept this. I won't accept this. It's unfair. It shouldn't be this way. Should. Other people should. There are people out here who should wear their masks but don't. There are people, you know, and I must have work in a certain way. All the work I do must be a certain way. I must have it a certain way. I must do it to perfection, or some other masturbation is what ELLIS called that, must theme, where we create these laws and rules, you know, that for me, my name's Joseph, so that'd be life according to the book of Joseph. And thou shalt not, and fill in the blank, whatever my pet peeve is. And then if the crisis impinges on that, well, then I'm furious, disturbed, and upset, and unable to care for, unable to really problem solve very well. Another, on the fear, that's kind of the angry side of things. On the fearful side of things is the what if. What if is what we all learn to do when we're little kids, laying in the bed and the monster's underneath the bed, we think, or in the dark closet. What if that monster's there? And then pretty soon that monster sure is there, and we're terrified, and we pull the sheet over our head, and so we as adults have that part in the back of our mind during this crisis. What if it comes to my household? What if I lose? What if these jobs don't prevail? What if the festivals are all canceled? What if? And it's not, bear in mind, if it were an objective question, it might be a very helpful question to ask in order to do some planning and problem solving. But it's not. Understand when it's leading to upset and disturbance, you're not asking what if for information. You're saying the what if is code for I'm going to be devoured. I'm going to be destroyed. Everything I love is going to be lost. We don't follow up the what if with objective analysis. Is what we do in therapy is we ask you what if, and then we go through the what ifs. But with facts, with data, and then we begin to get a more reasonable, we move back to identifying rational fears rather than oceanic anxiety. And then we can deal with rational fears and take steps and problem solve. Another kind of thing that happens on the anxious end of things, the anxiety end of things, is the notion that if something's dangerous, I should endlessly obsess about it. I should keep it in mind and worry over and over and play the scenarios over and over and never let my mind rest or go far from the dangerous object. And this is, of course, is a very dysfunctional belief, leading to us feeling very, very bad. No question. Pygmy in the land of giants. That's kind of the attitude we take when we're suffering and we're in this irrational response to stressors and to activating events. The belief that gets activated is that I'm too little. This is too great. I just feel little and powerless. And this feels huge and awesome and dark and frightening. What comes to my mind is the movie Amadeus. And as he's composing, Amadeus is, like many of us, has both a love and a dread of his father. And he has this dreadful vision of his father as he's composing. It's just really a powerful kind of enactment of a fear, a subconscious deep fear arising in a distressed personality and the forms that it takes. So he definitely felt like a pygmy in land of giants, a bad pygmy that was about to be punished in his case, I think. Okay, and so these are beliefs that are irrational, inappropriate, but we tend toward them. And we have to correct ourselves. So we tend toward them because of negative life experiences. And Ellis even believed that our chromosomes kind of push us. He saw mankind as being just a little bit crazy. So did Freud. So he's not alone in that. But we must, the solution is rationality, rational thinking, and problem solving. Okay, if we could go now, please, to slide number 8. Just let me know when that's up.
That's up.
Okay, very good, very good. So let's think about if we change the form. This is like a formula, folks. ABC. If you change the B part the irrational belief to a rational belief, evidence-based belief, you're going to start having rational, evidence-based emotions and responses, and you're going to start becoming effective, okay? So we wouldn't want you, it's irrational for you to say, magically whistling through the dark like a little kid whistling through a dark room. We don't want that. I mean, that's denial. There is real risk. There is real change. So we don't want to have you lie to yourself and say everything's going to be fine. We can't promise that. But what we can do is we can adopt the adult, mature attitude that life is imperfect and that it's filled with risk and change, that is the nature of our life. Life is imperfect. People are imperfect. We make mistakes. It's part of our story. We make mistakes. We experience accidents. We are all vulnerable to the incidental and unplanned. That's the reality of life. And that's a mature mind that can accept and hold that. But what comes with it is a mature coping type of emotional response. And look, it's a cause-effect world, okay? It's a cause-effect world. There are no shoulds, there are no musts, there are no unfairs. You know, A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D. In terms of folks, people that I meet with their symptoms and their challenges, I say to them, of course you're having these symptoms. Of course you're having these challenges. Because those things that you're experiencing are the net result of everything you've ever been through, every choice you've ever made, every part of your personality leads inevitably, could be no other way, to that outcome. Because it's a cause-effect world. There are no curses, there's no mojo. There's simply A against B leads to C. And you know what? Every time, I mean, the crazier that a person seems at first when I'm talking to them, every time that I can develop an open relationship and trust and really get to understand their cause-effect world, every time, no matter how weird and crazy it may seem, their feelings make total sense once you understand how they're thinking. Make total sense. So if you're feeling the depression, if you're feeling the anxiety, if you're having panic, rest assured, you know, if I thought the same thoughts that you're thinking, I would have the exact same response, the same problem. And sometimes do, because sometimes our imagination does get the better of us. It's a task in returning back to logic, returning back to mature thinking, reminding ourselves that A plus B equals C is a cause-effect world. And that, you know, the old idea that crisis is really another word for opportunity. I think that's the same symbol for crisis in opportunity is in Chinese or some other foreign language. And well, it's quite true, you know, this is nothing net changes in the planet. The planet's net resources are exactly what they were before. They're going to be redistributed because of this major structural change in the economy. I have another client in Dallas who's a restaurateur, and he's luckily had the foresight to write in some clauses into a restaurant lease that he is about to open that allows him to escape having to open the restaurant because, you know, the restaurant business is fundamentally changed. You know, at least for say several years until they get the virus. Maybe it can have a story like polio and one day be nearly eradicated, but it's going to take years, of course, for that day. So the restaurant being fundamentally changed. So the point being, that this creates for him now a new opportunity about how to deliver food. People still want food, right? How to deliver it in a way that fits his vision and interests. This really, to the unanxious mind, it can be perceived that there's opportunity here. What about the lifestyle change? Is it all bad, really? I mean, I've been busier with electronic devices than ever. And as you can see today, I've not gotten much better using them. But hey, how about the cell phone obsession, the screen obsession that so many of us have? Hasn't that gotten a little better? I've really thrived actually in the isolation. Physically, I've started walking again, and it's been really good for me. And there are other lifestyle aspects. Checking in with my relatives more often than the past. But it led to more rich use of my time. The truth is, people are resilient. People do bounce back. Systems are stable. Systems will return. You know, they're distressed, but these are rational beliefs that give us reason to have an appropriate emotional and behavioral response. Let me talk about those finally, the appropriate emotional and behavioral response on the last slide, consequences appropriate. You let me know when that's up.
It's up.
Thank you so much. So instead of anxiety, when we've got our thinking right, and you know what? It's possible, since this is like a simple math equation, you can work from any one of the elements back to the other in order to make a change. So you can even think about the emotional consequences that you want to have. How do you want to feel? How do you want to behave? And then ask yourself by inference, what's the rational truth that supports that? What real life evidence will support how I really want to behave and how I really want to feel? So instead of feeling anxious about some dreaded, undefined terrors, what about feeling alert? See, that's survival oriented, isn't it? If I feel alert to the threat, I'm washing my hands, I'm using my mask, I'm giving good advice to others, I'm alert, just like the person walking along the curb is alert to the passing bus and not stepping out. That's rational adaptive behavior. What if instead of seeing this overwhelming dread as the dark ghost-like figure in Amadeus, what if I see it instead as a cause-effect problem, many of which mankind has faced, and it's a challenge. I perceive it to be a challenge. There's a psychologist named Lazarus who spent his career studying stress and stress adaptation, and he boils it down to a person being able to shift from fear to challenge in their mind. From being able to, he says, the perception of an attack is what causes fear. And if we can reconfigure that, depersonalize, it's not an attack, it's a cause-effect phenomenon. It's got risk, it's got challenge, it's dangerous. But you know what? There's a lot we can do here to solve this problem. You know, then we become like the team getting ready to go out, the football team getting ready to, remember that? The team getting ready to go out onto the field, their team captain pumping them up, getting them ready, saying, we're going to go out there and what? Get killed? Get wiped out? It's a disaster? No, we're going to go out there and destroy. We're going to go out there and win. We're going to turn this into a challenge. When a human being shifts from fearful posture to challenge posture, they become a different creature. just a different creature, right? So we can adopt that. There's a word I love that I got in my reading that nobody uses called equanimity, and it's like courage, but it's a little different in that it suggests standing above the fray, the chaos, standing above the chaos, like the captain of the ship, staying in control, remaining alert, engaging the problem. That's equanimity. You know what? And courage is still an appropriate response for a threatened mankind. You know, we need to remind ourselves, we're not the first generation to face global threat. There was one before us, the greatest generation it's called, that faced a worldwide threat that was a menace just as bad as this, if not worse, because it promised enslavement and brutalization and the destruction of our values. And we as a nation, we as a world rose to meet that challenge. That was the greatest generation, called the greatest generation. And not only did they serve us and deliver to us a country upon which we have all these benefits today, but they didn't ask for any thanks or any recognition. They simply reassembled and took their places in their communities. To me, that's the definition of a hero. The responses that we can have if we choose with rational thinking are generosity and gratitude. We can be so grateful for the time we have and the moments we have with each other, our loved ones. We can realize that our generosity, our help of others matters right now. It matters right now. This is a time, this is a season for generosity, being kind and giving. Compassion, of course, because we can see that our enemy, this disease, is merciless. It doesn't choose the bad or the one political party or another. It is merciless. And this is a time where we need to have compassion across all of our individual differences. And confidence, just as our great generation before us did, that we cannot be defeated. We will make it. And instead of acting out, we can act on. That's the essence, in closing, that's the essence of leadership, I believe, is acting on. Some people call it, some therapists call it controlled coping, but it's leading folks to resolve the problem, to eliminate the threat, to secure our society again. So these are the consequences. Here's where we end up with this list. If we use the ABC model and use it to our benefit. So I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to, hey, look up Albert Ellis. He wrote many books and articles. He's very concise and easy to read. And his solutions have very, very quick and dramatic effect on disturbance and feeling disturbed, just like the letter did. The IRS letter holder had a quick resolve. You can have a quick resolve. And with that, I thank you so much for your attention and your patience, and turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. We are truly grateful that you shared this with us. Many of the same things, I know I've had a lot of these feelings, and it's certainly going to be a benefit to me to think about everything that you have said. I wonder if there's any questions. If there are, and you want to type them quickly into the Q&A, we'll be happy to ask them and and let him answer them. And while I'm waiting to see if there's any questions, I will tell you that next week our webinar will be the new norm. The leader in that is Jeff Fairchild from the city of, oh dear, I just forgot the city he's from. Sorry, but it'll be on the invite on that comes out Monday morning. So be sure and sign up for that. And he's from Farmer Branch. Thank you, Jessica. I knew somebody would type it up there for me. But if so far there are no questions, and with that, once again, I'll say thank you to Joseph, because he took his time out of his work week, and we really appreciate it. I hope everybody has a great rest of the week and a nice weekend coming forward. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.